Hello everyone, my name is Cecilia, I'm from Brazil, and today I'll be talking about my research in social anthropology at the National Museum of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, where I research yoga and meditation practitioners who live in this city. Wait, I cannot move my slides. Yeah. So my ethnographic research, I've been observing a group of Vedanta students and yoga practitioners from Rio de Janeiro since 2011. They study Vedic texts such as the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads in a non-profit cultural association called Vidya Mandir, in which classes given by Professor Gloria Arieira take place. Arieira, seen as a master or guru, learned traditional of Advaita Vedanta as taught by Swami Dayananda in the 70s for 4.5 years at an ashram in India. And since her return to Brazil, she has dedicated her time to teaching Vedanta and a life of yoga at Vidya Mandir. The group of approximately 200 students is widely varied, consisting of university professors, students, retirees, psychologists, filmmakers, engineers, entrepreneurs, biologists, therapists, among others. And it must be highlighted that the interlocutors are not only yoga and meditation practitioners, but have also been studying Sanskrit and Vedanta texts for a relatively long period. For each Upanishad course is about 3 years long. Thus, most see themselves as experts, as they are seen by fellow practitioners as having a deeper understanding of yoga and Vedanta than most beginners or casual practitioners. And there's a large presence of yoga and meditation teachers, many of whom carry out other professional activities as means of income support, in addition to teaching. Most of them participate in other groups of practices, even as teachers, and look to Vidya Mandir as a source of learning to pass on to their students. Most practitioners have taken at least one trip to India at some point, with the aim of deepening their learning on yoga. So after living a few years or months in an ashram, it's deemed essential to experiencing and assimilating the teachings while immersed in Indian culture. Nearly all of them have or are in the progress of obtaining a university degree and therefore are inserted in the context of the urban middle classes. They seem to integrate the yoga routine with systematic study of history and phenomenology of yoga, whether to improve their credentials as yoga teachers or to better understand the origin of their personal practice. So we can distinguish them as representatives, for the most part, of a middle class of high educational background. There are in the group people of different beliefs, but most of them consider themselves non-religious or Hindu. Although the guru teaches that the knowledge of Vedanta would be beyond any religious belief, in the sense that it can be taught exclusive as philosophy, it becomes clear that after a few years of study, most practitioners actively attempt to embody a yogic lifestyle and even come to see themselves as Hindus. This means that some of the long-term students end up developing an inclination to embody a Hindu spirituality in the sense of living according to what they call a life of yoga. Still, Hindus are not the most revealing transformation they undergo. It's clearly not a physical change, but a change in worldview and lifestyle. According to the Vedanta learned by the group, the acquisition of knowledge brings a fresh view to negative situations, a process which is crucial to one's emotional maturation and thus viewed as a valid basis for overcoming suffering. From this perspective, the yogi is understood as someone who tries not to be dominated by a pattern of reaction and seeks to acquire the ability to hold on to impulses and desires, understanding mistakes as opportunities to grow in order to have a mind that has gone through a process of questioning. Most interlocutors have as their goal an inner search that involves the practice of austerity and simplicity, and they do strive to live a life of yoga in the best possible ways. This means developing quite valuable qualities, such as being simple, calm, and above all, having discernment, in the sense of knowing which attitude would best fit in accordance with one's dharma, doing what is correct or appropriate in each situation, or what will be one's duty. So yoga for the groups means to unite, to integrate the mind into actions. What one thinks must be integrated with what one speaks and how one acts. Thus, living a life of yoga is trying to constantly perform this exercise. Nonetheless, it's necessary to highlight that they strive to practice these disciplines as an ideal to be conquered, as a process in which they observe their actions to gain self-knowledge. Some interlocutors point to the necessity of great concentration to overcome the powerful urges of the body and mind during practice, when the exercise appears to inculcate the practitioner's ability to hold attention during periods of physical and mental challenge. Being able to focus rather than being distracted by the thoughts that press upon oneself, including the thought of quitting, makes the normal outward orientation of the yogi's attention be turned inwards. This is in line with the ultimate aim of yoga, which would be the ceasing of the fluctuations of the mind or the attempt to control or restrain from mental fluctuations. Understanding that patterns of how a person thinks need to change in order to create a state of being directly connected to the body, most of my interlocutors believe that especially negative thought processes end up becoming a habit. Hence, some interlocutors engage in a fight against the notion that their thoughts are uncontrollable. For Laura, the goal of living a life of yoga involves the discipline of self-observation, watching her interactions as if they were happening to someone else. This occurs by developing a witness consciousness detached from the ego in the form of a self that watches her life without identifying with experiences or personalizing what happens to her. According to James, it is only when he starts examining who is living within him that he can identify his ego self and then be able to observe how his ego self reacts in each unfolding interaction. Martha argues that to attain mental balance, she needs to pay attention to her attitudes and, more importantly, to be aware of attached habitual thoughts. Many interlocutors understand that one's attitudes create a state of being connected to the body, and that when people change the patterns for how they act and think, these thought patterns or attitudes can change their state of being. Martha, for example, tries to do this by breaking free of habitual cycles of thinking and feeling. According to Hugo, in order to change his attitudes, he starts by seeking to be aware of his thoughts, striving to make a conscious effort to observe his automatic mental attitudes. And another practitioner, Mara, revealed that her habitual thoughts are not always to be trusted. Hand in hand with the attempt to cultivate an awareness of unconscious roles and habitual behaviors, I observe a bodily change related to the physical and mental practice of yoga and meditation, which works as a kind of construction of the self. In this way, the constant observation of one's attitudes seems to involve a particular knowledge of the body and mind built upon disciplined skills and internal mastery, which on that account enables the construction of a new self and accordingly a new culture. I have attempted to show that the yogic self does not constitute a passive entity, but is built in terms of the active process by which practitioners come to construct it. While observing their lifestyle, it was seen that their selves, through the practice of self-study and self-mastery, become more flexible, changeable, and revisable, as a result of an increased self-observation, which for most interlocutors leads to greater self-reflexivity. Yoga meditation for the interlocutors seems to be able to form and construct the old and new self, changing concepts, values, and cultures in which the selves function by way of transforming the practitioners' thoughts and behaviors. Their identity and sense of being are re-evaluated by the contribution of an altered sense of body awareness, which is created by the performance of disciplinary intentions as the body and the mind are strengthened and trained time after time by cycle upon cycle of repetitive practice. As some interviews described bringing to their normal life the attempt to change the ego self-identity, they seem to pursue a self which is free of conditioning. But it's crucial to emphasize that there is always a tension between the ideal of acting and thinking in a particular way and what attitudes are actually possible to be aware of on a daily basis. If on the one hand, these practices stimulate the emergence of a series of emotional and cognitive experiences, on the other hand, they consist of a process of body and mind discipline, in which the control over these experiences is also learned. These physical and mental exercises can be understood as enabling a sense of agency and empowerment, through which interlocutors see themselves as more capable of becoming conscious of habitual thoughts and enhancing the feeling of belonging. The sense of collectivity is also present when they take into account the agency of a cosmic order or conscience, which is seen as bringing down one's ego and providing a feeling of recognition that they are not completely responsible for all that happens with them. This dependency, when they lean on the order of events, or this lack of autonomy when they take into account this broader agency, is something that contrasts with the primacy of the individual prevalent in new spirituality studies. One of the goals of yoga for interlocutors is to change thought processes, and as a result, practitioners end up changing habits and behaviors to build a new self. In the narratives of self-transformation, it is possible to notice a reinvention of the self, a change that is valued in the direction of perfection, a subjective change accompanied by bodily transformation. The construction of a yogic self includes weaving new relationships, deconstructing the old self, and through complex process of subjectification, integrating the practitioner into this new culture. I argue that to live a life of yoga, as interlocutors call it, does not consist solely in the performance of certain behaviors and adherence to norms and rules, but also bears a broader meaning, whose objective, self-realization, is far wider than a body discipline. While there is an attempt to attain integration of body and mind, transcendence and immanence, self and other, practitioners of yoga and meditation try to become aware of habitual social roles. And when conscious of the process of building a self-image, they make use of these practices as a means to relativize this construction. Thank you.